Safe and sound at home again. Let the waters roar, Jack. Safe and sound at home again. Let the waters roar, Jack. Long we've tossed on the rolling main. Now we're safe ashore, Jack. Don't forget your old shipmate. Folly, rolly, 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 ride-o.
We're honored tonight to welcome Stephen Bowen back to Cohasset to help celebrate the 50th anniversary of the Apollo moon landing and to take part in the library's summer reading program, A Universe of Stories, and I'm sure you'll hear some great stories tonight. We all know that Cohasset graduates can achieve great heights, and Stephen, a 1982 graduate of Cohasset High School, literally went into space 3 times, logging more than 40 days in orbit according to the NASA website, which I checked a little earlier. A 1986 graduate of the Naval Academy, Stephen also earned an MS in Ocean Engineering from the MIT Woods Hole Joint Program in 1993. Stephen began his career working with nuclear submarines, so he went from the ocean to the skies, and became the first submarine officer to be selected by NASA as a mission specialist in the year 2000. I'd like to thank the town's Community Services Group, which is the Paul Pratt Memorial Library, Safe Harbor, Elder Affairs, Recreation, and Veterans Services for collaborating on this event today, and the opportunity Stephen had earlier to meet with the kids at rec camp and to meet Cohasset families at the library. Let's all give a warm welcome to Cohasset's own Stephen Bowen.
Good evening. So I was thinking earlier today, 9:32 this morning, what was everybody doing? I was actually doing email and I missed it because I hadn't looked at my clock at 9:34. But at 9:32 this morning, that was the 50th anniversary of the launch of Apollo 11. And so 50 years ago today, was the first time man reached out and basically touched the moon. But what's also interesting, I know we have a crowd here that's a little bit, on average, older than most of the schools I talk to. So usually I ask this question the other way, but this time I'm going to ask it this way. Who here was born after October of 2000? So everybody raise your hand if you're born after October of 2000. Okay. You people are a different species. So while 50 years ago today was the first time we went into another planetary body, basically, October of 2000, we left the Earth permanently. We have had people continuously living in space for almost 19 years. And so for about a third of the Earth's population, they don't know this place without somebody living in space. And I don't know if we've really started to grasp that, or even if anybody realizes what significance that is. We're no longer tied here to Earth. When we look down at Earth, we're looking down at Earth, and we can see the whole, which is pretty amazing. So thinking back 50 years ago, I got a couple siblings back there somewhere. I don't know if Danny remembers. Danny? Where's Danny? Hey, Danny, you remember watching the moon landing? Okay, so he's a year younger than me. So you're watching a grainy video. I mean, if you watch the video of Neil Armstrong stepping on the moon, it's really grainy. Then think back about the TV sets we all owned at the time, which was really grainy. So we were watching grainy video on top of a grainy TV set. And for us, it was black and white. We didn't get a color TV till after the Bruins won a Stanley Cup. So, we all had our demarcations to these things. And just think of the world that has been transformed since then. The technologies and the capabilities that we have garnered really from, I blame space exploration for why I became an engineer. I mean, it really piqued my interest and it led me along that path, I think. And I think that is really the greatest contribution to humanity that the space program did. But there's a lot of tangible things as well. So this is a nice work day on orbit, but didn't start there. Let's see. Is there anybody else here that is in that picture? There's a few people that still live in town, so I'm surprised that someone didn't show up. So where are you? Where am I? show this picture. So this is, I should probably stand near the microphone. So I show this picture everywhere I go. I don't want to. All right. So I show this picture everywhere I go. And the reason I show this picture actually is for something we did not during the school year, but the school year at the end of the school year before. So we used to move up to the next grade a week early and get oriented and all that. So at the end of the 5th grade, the U.S. Postal Service was changing the price of stamps from like 10 cents to 11 cents or some exorbitant rate like that. And they had a contest where we all drew pictures and submitted them to see, get one selected to be a stamp. Mine, of course, did not get selected. I was not the artist my siblings were. But I drew the Apollo Soyuz program. And I always remember that that was the thing I submitted. And the other reason I like to show this picture is I like to talk about school. And so the first story I tell actually has to do with where I was earlier. I actually walked into the room that was my kindergarten classroom, and then I walked to where my 1st grade classroom would have been at the Osgood School. In 1st grade, I had Mrs. Basilier as my teacher, and Mrs. Tewksbury took over for her. But in those days, teachers would tell you things. And so my teacher told me, Mrs. Basilier told me, Steve, you are in the lowest reading group. And some of my classmates can probably figure out who were in the higher reading groups. But being stubborn, I worked real hard. I learned to read. By the end of the year, I had moved up to the highest reading group. And I learned a couple things. One was, there's probably some reason these teachers are teaching us stuff. So if there's something you're not quite getting, maybe if you pay a little more attention to it, maybe you'll figure out why they're trying to teach it to you. So I kind of followed that path along the way through school. And then the other thing I learned was I really like to read. So I spent a great deal of my time reading. I still do. Still like to read as well. So after, oh, is it working? This way. There it goes. Wrong way. This way. Complex technologies. So this being the library's program, I thought I'd point out some of the great reading that we had as children. It's funny, but this was the first book I ever owned. This was not 7th grade. My 7th birthday, I got this from my sister. And it turns out that this is a true story, and it's highly related to where I live now down near Galveston. But I'm not going to explain why. So you all can figure it out if you ever go chase this book down. Of course, you had the Hockey Stars of 1971, everybody's greatest literature, Stan Fischler. I did read War of the Worlds. I had this, not this particular copy, this is a hardcover picture, but I had this paperback version, which I got off the bookmobile in like 4th grade. And I've reread that book I don't know how many times. As a matter of fact, right now on my iPad, I have a copy of the old movie. But it's, these are the things that, when we talk about children reading, sometimes people want to throw things at them that are literature. And clearly, I was not reading literature at all times. And sometimes it doesn't take literature to get you motivated. So, this is, of course, Sandy Beach. And so after I graduated from Cohasset High School, I had done well enough that I kind of had a chance to pick where I wanted to go to school. And I chose to go to the Naval Academy. And at the Naval Academy, I studied electrical engineering. And I followed that same concept there so that I did pretty well. And when I graduated from there, I chose to go in the submarine force. Of course, I wanted to fly, and my vision just didn't quite work out. So when the options were there, I chose to go in the submarine force, which was actually worked out really well. I really enjoyed being in submarines. And so I was 1996. I was on deployment on a submarine. We pull into port. And on a submarine, you don't get to see all the information, all the messages you get. So I had a stack of paper about like this. And I'm flipping through it, and there was a message there about, hey, applying to be an astronaut. And I thought about it and said, oh, that'd be interesting. Maybe I should try and do that. And I looked at the date, and the date had already passed for when I could apply. But the next time around, in 1998, I was on shore duty, and so I applied to become an astronaut. So becoming an astronaut is not like these other things. You don't get to choose to become an astronaut. You feel very fortunate to be selected. So when I applied, there were 8,000 applicants, and we chose 17 astronauts. This last class, we had 18,000 applicants, and we chose 11. So I am so happy after looking, I went through 800 of the applications this time, and I am so happy I didn't apply with this group. And I feel fortunate and lucky every day that I had this opportunity given to me. And that's really what it is. You feel fortunate. You don't feel like you earned it in any way. You don't feel like you deserve it in any way. You just feel lucky to have had this opportunity to become an astronaut. And then to get to fly in space on top of that. So in between, I did submarines for 14 years. And like I said, I really enjoyed it. And these are the submarines I was on. So you get selected to be an astronaut, and you study for 2 years before you're qualified to be an astronaut. And for me, that didn't mean what it means now. So when I went through, we had 135 astronauts. We were flying space shuttles 6 times a year, and I did not get assigned to a mission until 2007. So the group that's going through now, the 11 that are going through our astronaut candidate program now, they'll get done with their 2 years as astronaut candidates, ASCANs, which may not be the best term of endearment, but I think it's, yeah, it could be worse. But they'll get done here in the next couple months, and more than likely one of those students, those ASCANs, those new astronauts will be assigned to a mission within the first year after being done. We're down to about 42 active astronauts right now. I feel fortunate to be among the active astronauts. So we'll see how this works out. But it's an evolving, changing world down there. As I said, so for 7 years, actually for 5 years after I was qualified, so 7 years of being at NASA, I was assigned to my first mission. So I often get the question of what do you do when you're not flying in space? So 90% of my job is not flying in space. It's supporting those that do, in a way. So I worked jobs that included space station training. I worked on space station hardware. I spent time traveling back and forth to Japan to verify that their equipment was going to work with the space station. And since then, I've had other jobs. I worked on the Orion capsule for a couple of years. Then I went over to commercial crew. Actually, I just started this job 2 months ago. So the commercial crew program, Boeing and SpaceX, they're building vehicles that will launch from Florida to take us back to the International Space Station, so we don't have to go to Kazakhstan for a launch. And I'm the joint test team lead for the office on that, and that's to verify that all the capabilities of those capsules will meet the astronauts' capabilities. So you have really interesting jobs. I've done capcomming. I was a strap-in. I got strapped in several crews for shuttle launches. So you have a lot of other things going on. We actually have so much work. Usually when you get assigned to a mission, your workload decreases significantly. So being assigned to my first mission was actually a great relief. My workload dropped dramatically, and it was just fantastic to train with this crew. So one of the things people also ask, how do you become an astronaut? And this is a good crew to point out where these people came from. So Heidi, Stephen Piper, was our lead spacewalker. She had flown once before. She was a Navy diver, Navy EDO. Shane Kimbrough was an Army helicopter pilot. Eric Bowe was an F-15 fighter pilot. You'll see him again later. Chris Ferguson was a Navy fighter pilot. Don Pettit, probably was one of the smartest human beings I've ever met. You can look him up online. He does some pretty amazing things that you can see he did in space. And Sandy Magnus was another material scientist. So everybody came from a diverse group background, and this was my first mission. So on the first mission, we took up about 10,000 pounds of equipment in this, what we call the NPLM. And it was a cargo vehicle module that we would take with the robotic arm and attach to the space station. Had about 10,000 pounds of equipment in it. And we changed the International Space Station from a crew of 3 to a crew of 6. We brought up a new toilet. We brought up the environmental control system to support a crew of 6 on board. This was Thanksgiving 2008. You can see some of the food we are eating, and we're all in the picture. This is Chris Ferguson. That's his head and eyes. And this is my arm back here. That's my arm. So we're all in the picture, including our cosmonaut friends who came over to the space station, to the space shuttle for for dinner that day. We also brought up the water recovery system. So this is a good example of, if you don't ask the question, you'll never get the answer. So the space shuttle, when it flies, it used fuel cells. We combine oxygen and hydrogen together, and you get water, and you get electricity. We like the electricity. The water was a waste product. So before the International Space Station came along, they used to dump water into space. And it was really cool. It looked like a snowstorm outside. It was kind of neat. But anyway, once the space station came along, we took all that water into the space station, we left it there. Because that was their resource for water on board space station. When the shuttle was going to stop flying, what were we going to do? Water is a pain to fly. It's weight. It's every kilogram you fly just costs money and up mass. So they decided that we're going to recycle it. So they came up with a system that recycles about 80% of the sweat, condensate, and urine on board space station every day. We're trying to make it even more efficient. And then, because of the efficiency with which this system does it, it's been repackaged, repurposed, and delivered to many places around the world that never had fresh water before, because it does it in a very rapid, very efficient method. It's surprising where you wouldn't have had that technology had you not tried to solve this problem that was a very specific problem. The repercussions, they go worldwide. So often when people think about what we learn in space, there's the pure basic research we do, and then there are things that you learn that you may not have even thought you were going to learn. And this is always a good example of that. Another example of that is the solar array system. So solar power is how we operate the International Space Station. It's a fairly benign system, and we have these giant rotating arrays that every time we circle the Earth, they do a full 360 degrees. And since we're in Cohasset, I'm going to use port and starboard. The starboard array was having difficulty. The motors were having difficulty turning it for a full 360. The currents were going up, and they started to look at it, and they said, there's something clearly wrong. So one of the earlier astronauts, Peggy Whitson, went out and took a look and found that there had been debris building up on the ring where the array was riding on the race ring. So they came up with a method, incredible machine, most complicated machine mankind has ever built, International Space Station, 250 miles in orbit, rotating the Earth every 90 minutes, going outside to fix it with a grease gun and a cloth wipe. So we sat there. I remember early on when we got assigned, and this became our mission, this is going to be hard. This is going to be complicated. We were thinking up of all sorts of different ways of collecting the material around the ring, different ways of making sure it's clean and lubricating. And when it all came down to it, a cloth wipe and a grease gun and changing out the broken bearings solved the problem. So sometimes incredibly difficult sounding problems have very simple solutions. You kind of have to step back and say, okay, what are we really doing here? What do we really need to do? And so the engineers who came up with this method, we've actually done it to the other side as well and preventive maintenance. And then we actually used a similar system for the robotic arms to keep them operating. But that was one of the great lessons I learned from that flight. So I came back to Earth after my first flight, and we all got our technical jobs, and I had a great job, as I said, strapping in crews for launches. I'd go to the Cape, set up all the switches. It was really, when I think about it, it's actually pretty amazing that you get to go in and you set up all the switches before launch. You actually take the crew and you help strap them in, shut the door, wave bye-bye. You're the last person to see them on Earth. And hopefully, when they land, you get to be there. I never saw a landing. I put people in, 4 or 5 shuttles. And every time they wanted to land, I was at the Cape for a landing, they landed at Edwards. And when I was at Edwards, they landed at the Cape. So I never saw a shuttle landing. So I know other people who have, like some of my family have seen shuttle landings, and I have not seen a shuttle landing. So after a year or so, we're coming up toward the end of the space shuttle program. And the first time in about a decade, NASA assigned a space shuttle crew where every single person on the crew had flown in space before. And so this was my crew here, STS-132. And everybody here had flown in space before. I'll just run through them. So Mike Good, he was an Air Force flight test engineer. He actually now works for Blue Origin. Tony Antonelli, Navy fighter pilot, works for Lockheed Martin. Pierce Sellers, just an incredible research scientist, climate scientist. He passed away a couple years ago, working at Goddard, just a fantastic guy. Gary Reisman now teaches at USC. He worked for SpaceX for a number of years. And Ken Ham, who is a Navy fighter pilot, who is our commander, and he's still out there flying fighter jets as a civilian. And we had all flown in space before, and one of the things that we knew was that flying in space is a team sport. So Ken Ham literally called up the owner of the Astros and asked if we could borrow the stadium for a picture. And he said yes. And what was really cool is that this was a cold day, in, it was like February in Houston, maybe 50 degrees, brutally cold. And, but we had the roof shut and everything, it was still cold. And so all of these people, we invited our whole training team, and a lot of them had worked the night before because we had a shuttle on orbit. And so we really appreciated the fact that they came out to the stadium after the fact. We were warm because we were in our suits. We had some of the Astros are here. There's a few people in the picture that aren't actually in this picture. This guy here, he's actually Junction Jack. He's in the suit, so we inserted him later. And our actual boss, Mike Coates, who's looking the wrong way, if you look at where he's looking, where everybody else is looking, we put him in too because he couldn't make it out to the picture. So one of the things that's sometimes get lost, you see the crew on orbit, you see the mission control room, and you see the one guy sitting in front of each of these consoles. And what you don't see is the 3, 4, 5, 10 other people sitting in back rooms, monitoring all the parameters, all the procedures, all the equipment, making sure that their systems are running correctly, feeding that information forward to that one guy in the room, who then feeds it to the flight director, who tells the Capcom what to say. And that's how we communicate, that's how we organize and operate. So, this is usually where I ask, who here, now how will I ask this one? I'm trying to look at the audience and figure out how to gauge this question. All right, so I'm just going to ask it out. After you take an exam, what do you do with that information? You dump it, man. See? You had the right answer. You just dump it, right? Oh, you know to begin with. That could, yeah. I'm going to recommend you don't do that, so I'm going to pass this on to your daughter. Don't do that. So sometimes you never know. So once STS-132, the flight that I was on, we call it the last flight of Space Shuttle Atlantis, because when we were assigned and when we flew, we were scheduled to be the last flight of the Space Shuttle Atlantis, but we all knew that they were going to add a flight. So we land, they say no more Space Shuttle crews, start working on your Russian, be ready to fly to space station, go for it. So basically half of my crew left the office. They didn't want to fly to space station, they wanted to go fly and do other things. So I'm there working on my Russian. I had taken over the EVA, the spacewalking branch of the office, so I was helping manage all the spacewalks. And I was also the family support astronaut for STS-133. So the family support astronaut, his job is to ensure that the families make it to all the events that the astronaut wants them at. So there's dinners and there's sort of mandatory social things. And so our job is to make sure the families are taken care of, which is really important. Because that's one of the things you don't want the crew member to worry about is how well their family is being taken care of. So I was doing that for STS-133, and it was October. It was Halloween night, actually. It was at Halloween down there, taking the families around. And the crew was getting ready to launch. And so they got suited up, got ready to go, and there was a hydrogen leak at the pad. And so we're not going to launch if the vehicle's leaking hydrogen, so that scrubbed it. So when they defueled the external tank actually broke. So suddenly STS-133 was not going to fly. They flew back to Houston. They did some amazing engineering and some technical work. Someday somebody's going to write a really good book about it. And they set a new launch date of February 2011. January 2011, Tim Kopra, their lead spacewalker, has a bicycle accident. And he's not going to be available for the launch. So, suddenly, I have to figure out who's going to take his spot. And the head of the office, Peggy Whitson, and CJ Sturkell there, and they asked, okay, who can take his spot as lead spacewalker? We want to make sure these things get done. And I thought it was an easy thing in a sense. So I took the 7 guys that were still in the office that were qualified for that position, and I gave them those names. And I wrote next to them, each of the names, you know, good things as to why this should be the guy that does this. Except for one name, which was mine. I said, don't pick me, I wrote the list. So I assumed, since I wrote the list, I wasn't going to get picked. They picked me. So suddenly, having dumped all that space shuttle knowledge, I had 6 weeks. Fortunately, I hadn't dumped it all. I actually remembered most of it. But I had 6 weeks to get ready for a space flight. And so just remember that. Sometimes you never know when you're going to need that information again. So just don't brain dump all of that useful information, even if you don't think it's useful. I mean, there's some pretty arcane information I probably should have gotten rid of, but for some reason I kept it. So this is what we had on orbit. Like I said, we had made the space station crew from a crew of 3 to a crew of 6. This was the group that was on orbit. This is Steve Lindsay, was not in my class, but the other 4 astronauts, American astronauts, all came into the astronaut office with me. So it was a very easy crew for me to transition into. Steve Lindsay had been our boss before, and there were 6 crew members on the International Space Station. And it's an International Space Station, Italian astronaut, 2 American astronauts, and 3 Russian cosmonauts. And it was the last flight of Space Shuttle Discovery, and that was a lot of fun. And this is how we left the International Space Station in 2011. And this is basically how it looks today. Try to think. So there's 2 things that aren't there right now. This thing here, ATV, usually there's a Progress there instead of ATV. ATV was a European cargo vessel. And HTV, which is a Japanese resupply vehicle, there isn't one there right now, but we get another one coming up in October. I think it's October. There'll be another HTV on. So it's the International Space Station, just a magnificent research facility. And we're currently getting there by launching from Kazakhstan. We launched the International Space Station on a Soyuz out of Kazakhstan, which is a strange place. I've been to one launch, and it was like living in a 1950s science fiction movie. You know, you're standing there. There's wooden bleachers. You can sit on the wooden bleachers if you want splinters, sort of thing. They weren't well maintained. There was a blockhouse where they kind of sequestered the family. And then about a mile and a half away, there's this rocket standing in the desert with a gantry next to it. About 20 seconds before it launched, the gantry falls away. And the only reason I knew when it was going to launch was because I was standing next to the public affairs guy for NASA who was doing commentary. And he was getting the time from Houston fed into his ear, so then he could talk to send it back over the airwaves, over the internet. So I was standing there and watching a Soyuz launch. It's bizarre. It's incredible. I mean, this vehicle's been working great for 50 years. But we would like to be able to launch from Florida and get there on our own. So we've been developing, a couple of companies have been developing commercial crew vehicles to take us there. And so you have SpaceX and Boeing. And SpaceX has already done an uncrewed mission to the International Space Station earlier this year, which was very successful. They had some testing problems a few months ago that it's probably caused a little bit of a delay. Boeing is getting ready to launch their uncrewed mission sometime this fall, and that'll be really exciting. And then they're each going to do a crewed test flight with 2 people for the SpaceX, and then on the Boeing vehicle, we're going to have 2 astronauts and 1 Boeing crew member. And the Boeing crew member is going to be Chris Ferguson, who you saw earlier. He now runs the Boeing's program. But so hopefully we'll be flying from Florida soon to go to the International Space Station. So the International Space Station is an incredible research facility. As I said, it's been permanently manned for almost 19 years. And it's just an amazing place for, I am big on it for the engineering behind it. because we actually built this thing in 16 different countries, and every piece fit and worked together. So that tells you how precise the standards were. This is awfully geeky, I'm sorry. But how precise the standards were that allowed them to build everything to fit together in space, because they never met each other on the ground. And it's just an amazing accomplishment. But that's low Earth orbit. And we want to turn low Earth orbit, as we're starting to, over to commercial entities. So there's already a program to look at how to lease portions of the space station to commercial enterprises to see if they can find a way of making it, they can make it profitable. They just, will find a way of managing this. So it'll be pretty exciting. And that's so NASA can now extend back deeper into the space. Sort of like how you develop the frontier. You get there, we sent out Lewis and Clark to map and navigate across the country, and slowly things progressed from there. And so we've stepped away from low Earth orbit, and we're trying to go deeper. Initially, we'll go to the moon, and then on to Mars. We've already actually done one test flight of this system. So EFT-1 in 2014 was a test of the capsule design. And I talk about this one in the sense that, you know how you watch Mission Control? And those guys were bored. It was awesome. Everything was working perfectly throughout the 6-hour mission. And they had nothing to say, nothing to do. I like my spaceflight nominal. I do not like it exciting. This was a perfect case of how nominal is great. So we do have a projection for what this evolution is going to look like. So EM1, so the first flight to the moon, it's actually going to go around the moon. It's going to be in a trajectory that's going to take them out beyond the moon and back. They'll go deeper into space than any human has ever gone before. But that's really a test flight for the system. EM2 is actually going to put people on the moon. We're building an outpost called Gateway, which you can see there toward the end, which will enable us to go to the Gateway, get pre-positioned and ready. It'll have a lunar lander there. They'll drop it to the moon, come back up. They'll refuel it. That crew will go home, come back. Some other crew will come back. It'll be a tended space station that will enable access to the moon. And this is that first mission. Like I said, it's a free return flight, which means if things don't work, we're still going to get the crew home. And this is actually sort of an artist concept of what this is going to look like when it flies, but it's pretty close, actually, as to what Orion is going to look like on its way to the moon for the first time. So, but today, I thought this was really cool. I have never seen, I'm going to do this real quick. I have never seen this many opportunities to see the International Space Station in one place in 1 week in my life. 3 pages. If you guys don't see the International Space Station, and the next week, don't blame me. All right? And tonight is like the best one of them all. So tonight at 9:42 p.m., some of you might still be awake. I know that guy in the middle back there will not be. Jackie, he goes to sleep about 8. He's a little old. But about 9:42, you'll be able to see the International Space Station. It's going to be about 42 degrees, about 45 degrees above horizon. It's going to come up 11 degrees above west. So let's see, which way is west around here? I'm confused. Which way is west is this way? All right, so it's going to go from west to 10 degrees above northeast. So that's a pretty good trajectory. So if you see this really bright, who's seen the International Space Station? Yeah, it's a really bright star out there. It kind of looks like an airplane at first, and then you say, oh, there's no flashing lights, and it's just cruising along. It's really cool. So we actually have 3 crew members up there right now. I usually like to go out with food, eating something good or drinking something good, because they're not. I like space food, but I like all food, so that works out pretty well for me. But not everybody likes space food. So if you have something good and tasty, they get great view, just lousy food. So, and then there's so many other opportunities over the next week or so. So if it's 5 or 6 minutes long, those are really nice. Some of them are a little odd, 1:45 in the morning. So what you're actually seeing is the space station is still in sunlight, and you're in darkness. That's the circumstance. So they're above the horizon. In the orbit we actually have them in right now, the position we have them in, gets a lot of sunlight throughout for the summer. So please take the opportunity to go out and see the International Space Station fly overhead. And think about the fact that people have been continuously living there for 19 years. It's absolutely amazing. Yes? Yeah, if you type in ISS sightings, that's all it takes. And you'll get this really long list. And so I put ISS sightings, it tells you where to pick. I put Cohasset down, and it gave you the closest point that they have a reference to. And it's actually I think it's at the base of Hull is the reference point that they use. So all these are really accurate. And it's really surprising, at least it's still surprising to me. I'm not sure why this should be surprising, but the times work out. It actually shows up when it's supposed to, which is really kind of neat. Clouds get in the way, but I think we'll be okay tonight. And so this is what we look like from space. This was we took this on STS-132. And yeah, that's where we are. My arrowhead may not be precise, but I think it's pretty close. And that's an image from the Hubble Space Telescope. So I always end with this one too, only because I'm from up here and most people aren't. But I have a video I want to show. And I think it does a really good job of showing how a space flight actually works. It shows us getting the vehicle to the pad, and then the crew showing up. Well, you'll be able to watch it. And then the music is kind of unique too. And it's because of the music I just can't give this video out to people. Not because we use the band Muse. They were doing a tour of the Space Center one day, and crew member Garrett Reisman basically cornered them and asked them to use their music, and they said, sure, talk to our lawyers. So they were all ready to be all happy with this, and of course the government lawyers managed to screw this up, so we can't hand it out because somehow the government won't let us. But it's a really good video, and let me get it set up. All right. Right, now it's about preface that for school children by saying, don't try this at home. Although my gymnastics skills are clearly demonstrated, the finesse is still not there. Very much. The other thing is, astronauts are allowed to play with food and you're not. I want to make sure that gets out there so that, small, impressionable children are paying attention. And then the third thing is we really don't spend a third of our time goofing off in space. What happened was the Olympics were going on, and Ken Ham wanted to get something on ESPN, so he had choreographed, we got to do this, and this, all this in one afternoon. And the gymnastics demonstration I was doing on the space shuttle, just for my own fun, I didn't know they were skating it initially. But all those, like the curling, the node hockey, we crammed all in really, really quickly. And it came out really well, I thought, because it really shows you some of the strange things about, like the Swedish fish in a fishbowl. I mean, that's just, so, yeah, we don't spend a third of our time goofing off in space, because otherwise we can get no work done at all. When we started, we were at 0, pointed straight up. 8.5 minutes later, you're going 17,500 miles an hour. You're circling the Earth every 90 minutes or so. And actually, the first 100 feet, you're going 100 miles an hour. So you're going pretty fast, right off the bat. The first one's easy. All the space shuttles were named after ships of discovery. So if you go back and you look at the names of each of those. So the video you saw, like I said, was the first last flight of the space shuttle Atlantis. Atlantis was actually named after the Woods Hole research ship, Atlantis. That's where the rest of the shuttles all got their names from similar vessels, in a sense. How they pick astronauts, generically how they pick astronauts, as I was saying, is sort of you have 18,000 applicants and they pick 11. There's really no perfect way to pick astronauts. They pick, so you screen them, and you get down to a pool of about 125, 150. You bring them down for a first interview, medical testing. Medical testing screens out about 30% of those. Then you get that remaining group. You do an initial interview, and you bring back 40, 50, 60 for a final interview. And so on that final interview, every single person that you're talking to is clearly qualified technically to fly in space. They're just incredible people. And, so what you're really trying to figure out is, could I spend 6 months with this guy on orbit? You know, when her stories become so boring after a couple of days, you know, would this person be willing to contribute? Are they going to, you know, the whole getting along with others, functioning in a closed environment is really a difficult thing to assess. And so one of the ways they do that is who they pick. I think they've done after my class, they've done much better. My class, I think, has gotten a little bit better about how they pick somebody. They look for people who have operated in hazardous environments in a team, on a team or in a group effort. Like I said, we have scientists who wintered over in Antarctica or done exploration on a research vessel at sea for 6 months. I came from the submarine force, so locking me away in a tube for months on end, running a nuclear power plant, yeah, that's fine. You know, we have fighter pilots, and so you got to get that high-stress environment and have people who are capable of sustaining that for long periods of time. And then the other part of that question, which maybe was you were really asking, how do they select them for the actual crew? So for space shuttles, they actually, you're kind of in a line, in a way. But they try and man the crews to ensure that you get that capability of functioning together, of getting along and getting the work done. Because there are some personalities, actually, I'll tell you, the office right now, I don't think there's a single person I wouldn't fly in space with for 6 months. They really have done an incredible job. When I first showed up, however, there were some personalities that may not have worked so well on orbit for 6 months. But they've done a really good job about that. So they try to mesh the crews. So during the space station era, a lot of times you're training alone, you're flying with just a couple people, and it's a sort of a different operating environment. Now that we're going back to a capsule, and you're going to be trapped in that capsule for up to 2 weeks, they're really, if we're going to go longer than 2 weeks, they're going to probably give us another habitat to go into to give you a little bit more space. It's hard to get your exercise requirements in. But, you know, we're going back to a capsule, so those 4 people in a capsule, they'll have to work on those dynamics a little closer. You don't want to put, you know, in any office environment, there are probably people who may not necessarily get along. You know that, we're not that big of a group. So it's an interesting process, because there have been some examples where it didn't work out so well. From ground to space and aircraft, just straight up, probably close to 100 years. The reason for that is physics. It's difficult if you look at getting out of a gravity well. In our current propulsion system, it makes it difficult to get that speed starting on the Earth with sufficient propulsion. So there are ways that they're talking about doing this. In a sense, there's a company that's going to loft a body up on a balloon to get it about 50,000 feet before they start the engines. And that'll get that way you just save that much energy and you'll be able to carry that much fuel. There's another one that's talking about refueling vehicle and then getting it up. So it's not outside the realm of possibility, but it's outside our realm of technology right now. Like one of those classic questions nobody ever asked. Because everybody thinks everybody's asked it before. So I said it earlier, I really think that watching sort of the Apollo program, Skylab, early shuttle missions, really led me on the road to becoming an engineer. The idea of being an astronaut, it was never forefront in my mind. There's very few astronauts that could game the system well enough to say, this is all I ever wanted. I know a couple actually who managed to do this. They would have been happy doing anything, but they really geared their careers to become an astronaut, and they succeeded. Most people who do that have failed. So I was perfectly happy driving submarines, but the opportunity came up. I had never done anything to preclude applying to be an astronaut. So when the opportunity came up to apply, I applied and then got selected. What they're going to select at any given year, we don't know in advance. And so what Heidi used to say, and I always thought this was a great answer, Heidi said, when you're young and you're in school, like in high school, grammar school, learn everything you can. I mean, just figure out what really interests you, and the things that don't, you work a little hard on, and make sure you do well in them. So then when you graduate from high school, you have choices and options. Then when you go to college, study something you really are interested in, because then you're really going to be interested in it, you're going to do well in it. And then when you get done with that, go get a job in that field that you're interested in. Because you're interested in it, you've already studied really hard, you'll do well in that job. And then get further education, a little more schooling perhaps. And then whenever you can, apply to be an astronaut. So, you laugh. The smartest human being, like I said, Don Pettit, he applied 5 times before he was selected. And Don has told me, he said, the first 3 times they were probably right not to select me. I think he's still a little bitter about the 4th time, but I think they got it right on the 5th time. But he said, you learn a lot during those years. That experience you gain operating in the real world really pays off dividends for the office. And so most of the people we hire are in their 30s. We've had some in the 40s and a few in their late 20s. Most of them are in their 30s. So, the other thing that was interesting about that, I get this when I get this question, is not just the space program, but when I was a kid, there were basically 3 channels, well 4 channels counting channel 2, and you had the UHF stations, 38, 56, 25, and you had feature, double feature on Saturdays, the important things, but they would actually have, Jacques Cousteau would be a special. Since you didn't have 100 channels to watch, you were watching research, exploration, and science was part of the news. It's still out there. It's just harder to find news that is science. And it's there's so much noise, so much chaos. There's so many things vying for everybody's eyes nowadays. We all need to put filters on and try to figure out, is this actually going to teach me something? Is this making the world a better place? Can I learn something from what I'm watching right now? And they kind of did that for us when I was a kid. I was fortunate enough. We also had, we had teachers. I'll point out Mr. Becker. So in 1975, we had the tall ships come to Boston the first year, for the first time. Mr. Becker made us learn the names of all the different types of ship configurations. Barks, barkentines, brigantines, yawls, ketches, sloops, etc. I am not so sure how much that contributed to his science class, but I obviously learned something that year. And actually, this was once again that week when we came up. I think that's what our assignment was. So, when a teacher takes a little bit of an extra step and just shows a little bit of interest beyond what their curriculum is, it's amazing. I have a son that's a Latin and an English teacher, and I think he would be a fantastic, because he just, a little bit of enthusiasm when a teacher has it, it's remarkable. It really pays tremendous dividends. Even for those kids that you don't think are paying attention or may have appeared to be sleeping during some of those classes. I've decided that it's not sleeping, it's a higher state of learning. At least that's what I tell people. All right, more questions. Go ahead.
I'm always wondering, I live in Florida, like the second floor.
Yeah.
And when I knew that shuttle was coming, so I was just outside my door. And my kitchen was rattling, the dishes were rattling.
Oh, yeah.
Kinds of things were
Yeah.
rattling. I'd run to turn on the television, and the shuttle was landing.
Yes.
So how fast was it going?
Okay, so this is I know we got in trouble when my first mission, we landed at Edwards out in California, and I was up on the flight deck for that flight, and we broke windows in LA. We were coming in. So Eric Bowen, who I flew twice with, great pilot, he said, he looked out the window. We've done our deorbit burn, and we're coming in to land, and he goes, boy, those clouds are a lot closer. They're moving real fast. He said he had never felt that feeling of speed until coming into land on the shuttle. He called California. We were still outside the Catalina Islands, but he could see the landing site in California at Edwards. And actually, this patch here, this Mach 25 patch, that's how fast we go. We're going 25 times the speed of sound. We're getting into the atmosphere. And yeah, it might rattle some windows. Yeah, whatever. It's fine. It's an earthquake. It wasn't us. It was natural. It was actually cool. So before I became an astronaut, I was stationed in Tampa. And I had my kids in the car. We had gone to a beach party with my command, Special Operations Command. And we were coming back through the base. And I had the radio on, and I stopped the car. I said, all right, get out of the car, and let's go stand here. So we're at the runway we built. I said, look that way. And so from Tampa, you could see the contrail of the shuttle launching, which was really it's just an amazing. Has anybody seen a launch? They're incredible, aren't they? They're just amazing. It's the feeling is. I highly recommend it if you ever get a chance to go and see a space vehicle launch. It's worth the trip. It really is. SLS will be something altogether bigger, because that's even bigger than Apollo was. You know?
These have been the voyages of the Space Shuttle Discovery. For a 30-year mission to seek out new science, to build developments, to bring nations together on the final frontier, to boldly go and do what no spacecraft has done before.
This is not what I meant to show you entirely, but this is cool. I'm going to talk over the rest of it. This was a Space Shuttle Discovery STS-133 last flight. And so when we landed on STS-133, talking about the parachute,
We're going to miss you, but most of all, we're going to miss Discovery. We wish her fair winds and following seas. Thank you.
So that you'll see that we had very high winds. When the parachute releases at the end, you can actually physically see the space shuttle move on the runway. Because the parachute does do a lot of work for us. It really does a good job slowing you down. It's pretty amazing, that little chute. But I think of the chutes that we're going to use for the Orion capsule are basically the world's largest swimming pool, the NBL, where we train at.
Discovery.
It takes out the whole cover, basically covers that very huge parachute we get in the next few.
Over here.
Going back to the previous question, so watching you go around the Earth, I spent one orbit on my first flight, 90 minutes. It's all it takes. You circle the entire Earth, 90 minutes. And you can see physical motion. It is just incredible. Oh, weightless is awesome. As a matter of fact, I think it can be the ideal place to retire. The problem is you can never come back to Earth because your body adjusts to it. It'll just be so happy floating. Your bone density, muscle mass will go away. You can be like a jellyfish by being a It feels so good. It never gets old.
Now, 17 feet 25 out of 150.
So that's
Straight down the runway.
yes.
Ran the energy numbers.
All right, let's give me another question.
Earlier was 18 feet 28, still getting 2,200 feet down. We'll call it the 2,100.
Space elevators. We've been talking about those at least since the mid-70s. Probably mechanics. So who knows how long in reality. The problem is a materials problem. When you think about the ideas, it's conceivable. You wrap your head around it, but you got to think of what materials possibly handle that stress. So that's it's materials question more than anything else. So one of my sisters made us see this landing. I never saw a landing. Like I said, some people can see it. So you can see how windy it is. So watch me do this. I could just feel this on board. It was surprising. Because I've done two of the landings already. So you could feel it was like, wow, I've never felt the chute being. So it does do that. Alright, more questions. A moment of panic during the space flight. I always get this question about were you afraid? In reality, you have spent years on the
You were able to take Discovery up to a full 365 days, and actual time on orbit. I think that you call that a fleet leader, the leader of any manned vehicle for time on orbit. Job well done.
Here's the last flight. Yeah, so you spent years studying the vehicle and studying your job. And so by the time you step on board the stage on the vehicle, you've accepted that part of the risk. So you spent years studying the vehicle. And the real question you have here, it's not a moment of panic, but it's the realization that people have spent a lot of time, money, energy, preparing you to go do a job. And now you actually have to go and do that job. And so that's the sweat, is am I actually going to be able to do what they've asked me to do? And that's what you're really worried about. You bought into everything else. You put yourself in there. It's really funny. It's Tony Antonelli, fighter pilot, the pilot on STS-132. He really legitimately was afraid of the scaffolding going from the pad over to the shuttle, because it was that open metal grating, and you could look down and see. And so he legitimately was afraid. We walked him across. And it was just like, so no, I never felt panic. I felt panic in other places in my training, but that's not actually other places. So suddenly we lost half of our tools and half of our work. And I was up here. So I was at sort of that point up here. Where we were going to work was out here. And I started working my way back. And by the time I got to the front of the truss there, the ground calls up and said, "Hey Steve, we want you to go to the toolbox on the back of Z1 and pick up these tools." They had already found another way of doing the task with the equipment that we had. And in reality, it worked out better. It was a much cleaner. We were going to put a lot of grease down to make this work, but we became a lot more efficient because we didn't have as much grease. And so suddenly they were confronted with a problem. We're actually already out. It's not like they have all night to solve this problem. They had to solve it right then. They said, "Okay, this is what you're going to do." And so I went and got some tools, which was the first time I got lost at the space station. And we went out and we did the job and it worked out cleaner and better than what we would have started with had we not. And Heidi said, we had a press conference, I think the next day or the day after that. And she basically said, hey, if it took losing a tool bag for people to pay attention to the incredible work that's going on the space station, it was possible. In a lot of ways. They always talk about how much it cost. It was a canvas bag with plexiglass covers. The grease was kind of expensive, but it was, a lot of money to certify it to fly in space, but it was really not technically that difficult a bag. Yeah, so getting lost on space station. I should probably explain that comment. So in the NBL, when you train, the sun is always out. When you go to space, the sun sets. And so I had been on the front part of the space station. I came back, I went up to this toolbox, which is right behind that antenna right there. And the sun set, and I'm like, how do I get out here? Which way do I go back? And basically they said, follow your tether. Your tether came from where you were. For the most part. It's not entirely true, it does move a little bit. That's how I got back. The second time I got back, I had no help at all. What happened was I was, my last space shuttle flight, I was working, I had actually gone over to the Russian segment to do work. They had sent me to the Russian segment to pick up a piece of equipment that had been left there. And in the NBL, where we train, world's largest swimming pool, we don't lock up the Russian segment of the space station because there's not enough room. And so every time I had gone to pretend to go back to the Russian segment, I had gone a certain path. On orbit, because everything was, there's no up or down, I went the opposite way. So I'm suddenly back on, I get back, and I'm going back down this Russian segment and go, this doesn't look right. I shouldn't be so close to thrusters. So I said, okay, where am I? They said, we can't help you. We don't have cameras looking that way. So they said, take your helmet camera and pivot around and see if you can figure out where you are and we can help you from there. So eventually we did figure out how to get me back home. I said, we got my work done too. But sometimes it's not so easy. It's not as easy as you think. Or I should pay better attention maybe. Go ahead.
So, were there some significant differences between the Russian and the American segments of the space station?
Yeah, there are actually very significant differences between the Russian and the American segment space station. Their electrical system is different than our electrical system. We actually have some pretty complicated pieces of equipment that converts the electricity that we send to them from our solar arrays, and if needed, we can take some power from them. It doesn't happen very often, but we have basic converters to do that. Initially, they had this green shag carpeting, and the SM, and it was. I think they've got rid of that now, but it just wasn't. The feng shui was all wrong, I guess. But no, there are some significant differences. They do things in a different way, which is good. So then you have redundancy, not just in having multiples of stuff, but you have redundancy in technology where they're doing something in a totally different way. So if something on your side fails, more than likely theirs did not, and vice versa. And so it's been a very good, redundant 20 years system. But yeah, so the moon, we've been there. We're going back. Looking forward to it. I keep trying to convince everybody else in the office we should send older astronauts because we're less susceptible to radiation damage. Hopefully you'll all be out there helping me convince people of that. Some of the younger guys don't agree. I'm not sure why. All right, more questions. Go ahead.
Simple question. Can you tell us something about sleeping and cycles on a weightless space station?
I love sleeping. I'm going to show you a picture. See, I don't always have time to do this. This is good to have a good amount of time because I have answers to questions people don't even ask. But this one I occasionally do get asked. All right, let's go down here. I always keep this as the last slide. And so this is Piers. Piers did this as a demonstration as to which sometimes I went to space. I averaged an hour more sleep on orbit than I do on Earth. I sleep great in space. It's fantastic. Floating, it feels so good. It's just so great. However, not everybody has that same ability. So they do offer masks, earplugs. This is our pillow. You actually take a strap and wrap it around your head to put you so you have some pressure against the pillow. You have straps in your sleeping bag to cinch your legs up because your lower back when you first get to orbit, as your body stretches out, lower back pain is very common. We take care of the fact that you're circling the Earth every 90 minutes, the day-night cycle issue. We take care of that by dimming the station. There's only a few windows. We'll cover the windows, and so you can actually make it pretty dark if you might need dark to sleep. I clearly don't need dark to sleep. And then at the end, it also, where I had more of a problem with that actually was in the submarines because we were on an 18-hour day instead of a 24-hour day, and that would really screw up your sleep. The space station, living in space, some people do have difficulty sleeping. They do give you, if you need medication, they provide medication to ensure that you get your rest so that you can actually perform the next day. So sleep is really important, but I had no problem sleeping. All right, right here.
What new upcoming space project are you using?
What new upcoming space project am I most excited for? I hate saying this, but I say it almost like that's a great question. I mean, it's usually people throw that out there as that's a way to fill time while he's thinking of an answer. But I've never really thought about that question because I've had this opportunity to work on really interesting things. So right now is sort of the crunch time for the Boeing and SpaceX vehicles. They actually exist. The vehicles have been built, and we're going to put people on to fly into space. And what I find exciting is my job is to ensure that those vehicles actually have the capabilities for the crew that they were designed to have. So that's really cool. It's really exciting to get my hands on and be a part of the team that's going to make these vehicles operate in space. The job I had before that, well, 2 jobs before that, I worked on the Orion capsule and the ground systems for the SLS, for the vehicle that's going to take us beyond low Earth orbit back to the moon. And that's this huge rocket that's already being built. It exists. The capsule already exists. It's just incredible. I mean, it's really exciting that these things are real. And we're going to be flying the Orion capsule because it's just a capsule, probably for 100 years. Because it'll be our vehicle to get someplace else to then be on a bigger vehicle to go and do exploration. And I had some great people I met in the astronaut office through the years. And Jerry Ross, he was there. He was an astronaut from before the first shuttle until the last one landed. And he said, there is never a bad time to be an astronaut at NASA. He said, it doesn't matter how long, how short, what you do in your career, there's always something interesting and exciting going on. And, the science that we do on space station and work on payloads, I actually did a lot of hands-on procedural development for payloads on the space station. And it's like, wow, this is going to be really interesting and exciting material science or biological science. Although every time they take blood or another sample from me, I'm less excited about this. That goes with the job too. There's just so much. There's so much coming, and there's so much that is happening. It's amazing. So, Space Force has been around in some ways for 50 years or so, in different ways. So each of the services had a Navy. Well, we had a Navy Space Command, which became Navy Network Command, which became something else. I think it's the Cyber Command now. But so there's been a Space Force of some kind for a long time. The Air Force, who I'd like to, are there Air Force veterans out there? Nobody? The jokes are going to be lost. So the Air Force, when I was at Special Operations Command, they put out an 8-volume set about the future of the Air Force. And they literally wanted to change the name of the Air Force to the Space Force. they want to call it the Air and Space Force. They wanted to control everything from the surface of the Earth to the stars. And we all laughed at it, of course, and what person's actually going to read 8 volumes of some of the Air Force publishers? So, but the idea of a Space Force has been around for a long time. It's not anything new. It's not actually what people think it is, in a sense. The last time there was a military manned space program called MOL, M-O-L. And the acronym of which now escapes me. I can speak in acronyms all day, but I can't remember what this one means. But anyway, it was ended in about 1967, 68, and those astronauts are actually transferred to NASA. So there will be no manned space force program as you think of it. But it was really the communications, the satellites, the operations of space itself. It's such a huge. The military has 3, 4. There's some like large multiple of NASA's budget goes to military space, which keeps all of our communication satellites. Our GPS system was military funded. You know, the things that allow people to find themselves anywhere in the world, and any way the world can use it, the U.S. military put in space. You know, that capability, that's where that money goes. That's what that would do, manage and make sure that's secure and safe. Yeah, so, yeah, the Space Force, you know, despite what my kids thought when they were little about me going and chasing aliens for a living, I don't anticipate having to do that anytime soon. So she asked, what does your family think of your job? So I was telling people earlier, for those of you who remember my mother, the attendance lady at the high school for, I think, 400 years, she hated every one of my jobs. You know, she thought being on submarines wasn't safe. What are you doing going out going safe? You know, flying in space? Well, first of all, she told me I could never be an astronaut. That was even better. I was living in Florida and already applied, and she came down and visited the Space Center. She was talking about, you know, space and astronauts. Oh, you could never do that. I'd already applied, so. But my immediate family. So I have the most amazing family. I have the most amazing wife. She's been incredibly supportive, and she would fix my essays when I was applying to MIT for grad school. She helped me with, you know, putting my package together for applying to be an astronaut. She's been incredibly supportive in helping us get through this. And my family, you know, we have this discussion now fairly regularly. Basically, after each of my missions, it was okay. I can leave now. You know, even before my first mission, if anybody in my family said, you need to stop doing this, other than my mother. Or any of those guys in the back row back there, I probably would have stopped. You know, it's not worth it. I had spent so much time at sea. I've been away from my family for significant portions of their lives, but I know my wife thought my job was important. You know, serving in the U.S. Navy was important. My job on the submarine was important. And I think having her support and being a part of that just makes it, you know, worthwhile. Once we got to NASA, we thought it was great because I was home a lot more, and my commute was only 9 miles. That was great. I didn't spend that much time away. Even after my first shuttle flight, we landed, and I got home, and Debbie said, you know, you were only gone a couple weeks. I didn't even have time to get into a routine. She was so used to me being gone for months on end, with no communication. I could call home from space. I call home every single night. And it's a different world. But yeah, so we have this discussion as a family. Now that my children are older, we have this discussion. We bring them into it now too. You know, right now, the last time we talked, everybody was still very supportive. But even if I was assigned to fly a mission tomorrow, if they said no, I'd walk away. I've had an incredible career. I've had great experience. Obviously, I'm still enjoying it. So if I'm still enjoying this job, why would I ever leave? My family seems to still be enjoying it, still seems to be encouraging me. Just waiting for them to give me another chance to fly in space. And then maybe I'll grow up and get a real job. But not anytime soon. All right, well, thank you. I do have something for Megan, since she's here. The library was the motivation for this. Actually, this is a summer reading program. Who put that up? The state?
Yes.
All right, so the state basically convinced her to invite somebody up, and I get to be that person. So I have this presentation item. This patch and this flag were flown on STS-132, which is the video, the crew from the video. So it's got 4.9 million miles. So if I was paid on a mileage rate, I wish I was. And 186 orbits of the Earth. So thank you very much for inviting me.